Greetings from the Kigali Global Dialogue in Kigali, Rwanda. I'm Nikhila Natarajan with the Observer Research Foundation, and with me is Dr. Rathin Roy, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in India. We will start this conversation where he left off in his first session, a new charter for growth and development, the Kigali Consensus. Rathin, tell us, where is the intersect of global finance for India and Africa?
India and Africa face the same problem, Nikhila, which is that India is the first country in the world that is being asked to complete its development transformation without increased recourse to fossil fuels. Every single country that came before us, including China, first used fossil fuels, grew, and now they're replacing fossil fuels with other stuff. India is the first, and after us come 40 countries in Africa. So the challenge before us in terms of our development challenge is impacted by the sustainability challenge in this fashion. And therefore we have to craft our own response. I hope that will be a very important part of the Kigali Consensus as it evolves. The challenge, put very simply for your viewers, is this. When you build a sustainable development project in a rich country, you get finance for it at 2 to 3% less than you get in India or Africa. Why? Because the people there who calculate what price should be charged for finance, even for a good cause like sustainable development, say, your countries are risky. We don't like your regulatory and institutional environment. And therefore, they put interest rates at levels where either they make a lot of money or we cannot afford those interest rates at all. If the world is serious about our common future and our common children, then it should be the case that finance for sustainable development is available at affordable rates, which means at least at the same rate as countries in the West are getting it. So this is not about aid, this is not about charity. This is about getting finance on fair terms at prices which make sense in countries like India and countries in Africa.
Great. So you're saying 2 to 3% less is what the rate is for the developed countries. So where does that leave us? So how do we get there? How do we get to a point where we get financed at rates that are viable?
Well, one thing we can do, which I hope we will do, is explore ways of setting up our own financial institutions that don't use these risk metrics. And I was very encouraged in the session when the UK Commonwealth envoy said that the Commonwealth Development Corporation, the CDC, is actually trying to do this. So then we have to ask ourselves as India and Africa, do we put our money in the World Bank, old institution, or do we put our money in the CDC, new institution? Do we put money in our own Exim Bank, which is willing to take on this challenge, or do we rely on the old traditional Asian development banks and African development banks to do it? Because we've given them 10 years to change, and they have not changed. And neither has the financial market in London or New York changed. The Norwegian pension fund, which has made its money out of fossil fuels, applies such stringent risk metrics to investing in India and Africa that we don't see their money. And there's plenty of money sloshing around, earning 2% and 1% in Europe. But it's not coming here, and I think that's a very, very important part of financial engineering that we need to do. Of course, we also need to keep reminding Europe, when they talked about our common children, that if you talk about our common children, then don't impose a premium on your common children's future by making money more expensive for sustainable development than in your own countries.
You know, you're neck deep in economics, in the subject and how it actually works. What are the compelling cases you've seen where a situation like this has been changed, or a country, by the force of what it has done or its strategy, has been able to actually make some headway?
Well, I think Rwanda is a very good example of a country that's made a lot of headway in this respect, but there are limits to Rwanda's headway. It would have made 3 or 4 or 5 times more progress. Ethiopia up the road has made tremendous progress. India too now, we have a magnificent renewables program going. So we're all making progress, but our progress would be much faster and to global benefit if these barriers could be removed. So we are not talking out of thin air. We have experience to go by. I don't think in India or in Africa today there is any lack of confidence that we know what to do, we know how to do it. We do not therefore obviously want to be lectured on either of these things, what we should do and how we should do it. We realize, for example, that poverty is a symptom and not the disease. So we are not really interested in people, I know Africa isn't, and India certainly isn't, who want to save Africa, who want to save India from poverty. Poverty will go when our countries work better, and getting our countries to work better, international cooperation involves giving us a level playing field, both on the exports front and on the finance front. That's all I think India and Africa are asking for, and I think that is at the crux of this Kigali dialogue.
Last thought I'll share with you. So what you just said, just before this, I heard the foreign minister speaking to Samir Saran, and he said almost the same thing. He said, there are some countries and some people, leaders, who think they have the divine right to speak for a larger population. And we as emerging economies and say Africa, India, he said, we believe that we will not compromise partners or partnerships, and we will do what's best for us. So in that spirit, your final thoughts, you've come a long way to be here, your final thoughts on how this goes forward.
My final thoughts are controversial. India is not China. And therefore, I hope and believe that you will never see what has become all too common with Chinese investments in common with old colonial investments, which is large numbers of people coming here, using your land, using capital to benefit essentially Chinese growth at the expense of the country. There are a number of examples of institutions like this which have actually pushing African countries into dependence of a very colonial sort. So I know that because India has no pretensions to being a rich country or a powerful one, we have a shared solidarity with Africa, and we have resources because we are large. So what we are trying to do is work together with the resources we have to try and walk this common journey together, and in a spirit of mutual interest and solidarity, not in a spirit of saving anybody or anything from a future which we define. That, I think, is the promise of Indo-African collaboration. It is therefore warm in a familiar sense, but not glamorous like an Oscar event. And that is how I hope it will continue to be.
Powerful thought. Rathin Roy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki.